I told it to go live. And it says that we're live, so I think we're officially on the air. We can, though, give it a few minutes while Andrea makes sure we're plugged up on the Loudon Museum page.
Goal number 1 of relationships, show up. We've done that part.
Show
Rule
up.
number 2, dress nice.
Dress nicely.
Yeah, this is a bit out of practice. It's been 2 months.
Oh.
Yeah.
We forgot how to have a conversation too.
Yeah, I know. I guess we should. Let me think. How does anyone have any Valentine's Day plans coming up?
Stay at home. Drink wine.
There you go.
I will probably be cooking dinner, but that is like kind of par for the course at my house. So
Yes.
Maybe
We
we'll
have a bunch
snowy-
of
It'll be a snowy Valentine's Day, maybe.
my daughter's birthday is on Saturday. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
For work.
is it themed? Is she gonna have a
Like,
birthday party?
Stay at home and not go anywhere theme.
It's quarantine theme. Yay.
I mean, if everything goes well, like knock on wood, we'll have a big party, like maybe in the summertime for her. But I'm sure Frozen or The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast or something is going to play into it somehow.
They're all
Maybe
love
it's
stories.
exciting.
It's thematic.
Laurie, so we are good on the Historians on Tap page. Andrea's got it up on the Loudon Museum page. How about Piedmont?
We're good.
Cool.
Great. Well, I say we go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for our virtual History on Tap. The theme for tonight's episode is relationship goals. So we're going to talk about some of the do's and don'ts in relationships tying into Valentine's Day. Hopefully you can take some notes on things to do and to not do, and sort of 4 different stories that we've got tying in for the theme tonight. I'm Joe Rizzo with the Loudon Museum, and joined with me as always is Anne-Marie Chrysiliason. Did I get that right? That was, I think, my first time actually.
That was pretty close. Curiolason.
Yeah, I don't want to.
You can't. You have to finish your drink and then try to say it. I think that's it. It ends up.
That's how we'll end the episode, is me trying to pronounce it. For now, I'm going to say AMC, joined again with the Piedmont Heritage Area, and Travis Shaw, also with Piedmont Heritage Area. And joining us for our special guest tonight is Katharine Pittman from Colonial Williamsburg, who is an expert on Martha Washington.
Whoa, let's not throw expert around there.
Goal number 2, build the other people up.
Great.
Well, all right, as always, we have different drinks that we're going to have for us when we tell our short story. So we'll just let you know what we're drinking and what we're going to talk about. Anne-Marie, let's start with you.
Would you want to go first?
Anne-Marie, what are you
Oh, I'm
drinking?
sorry.
What
I
are you
had
talking
the
about?
screen froze. The screen froze for a hot second. So tonight I am drinking Black Ox by Old Ox Brewery, located in Ashburn, Virginia, and Middleburg. And I'll be talking about a wonderful, tragic, Civil War doomed romance, Romeo and Juliet story between a Confederate spy and a Union millionaire. So,
Juicy. All right, Travis, how about you?
So tonight I am breaking with tradition. I am not only telling a story that is not sad, but I am telling a 19th century story. I'm going to talk about 2 Quaker sisters, smart and sassy and snarky, who were looking for love during the Civil War. And I am drinking Hope by Smoketown Brewing in Brunswick, Maryland, one of my favorite spots.
Man, relationship goal number 3, keep it fresh. Travis is breaking away from
Change
the
it up.
Revolutionary
Change it
War,
up.
moving into the 1800s. Katharine, how about you? What are you drinking and what are you going to talk about tonight?
All right, well, I'm kicking it old school back to the 18th century, starting with my Williamsburg Winery in the glass too. I don't know.
whoa.
See it. I know, I'm that cool. Down here in Williamsburg Winery, very good winery, drinking one of their bottles of Norton, which just went out in the wine club shipment last week, actually. And I am going to talk about, surprise, surprise, Martha Washington. But before she was Martha Washington, when she was Martha Dandridge, and she was looking to marry her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis, and all of the drama that went into that with her first father-in-law, John Custis IV.
Awesome. And I am drinking Ultramerrang from Crooked Run. And I'm going to talk about maybe the most famous letter of the Civil War, but especially one of the most famous love letters from the Civil War. The letter written by supposedly Sullivan Ballou, a letter that caused Ken Burns, who made it famous, to say, "It's a letter that transcends even the extraordinary of the Civil War. It's about the tension and the love that exists between a man and a woman. Every man in this country wishes he could say those things to a woman." A bit dramatic for him, but that's what I'm going to talk about.
Whoa.
But before that, Anne Marie, do you want to kick us off with your story?
Yeah, let's jump right in. So starting off with a tragic love story. This should be a great story to hear if you're into Romeo and Juliet, either the play version or the Claire Danes version. If you're into Bridgerton, you might enjoy this. If you're an Austen fan and like Gothic novels, this hits all of the right notes for you. Only it's better because it's true and it really happened. So to set up, picture it. Fairfax County Courthouse, 1861. Antonia Ford is the oldest daughter in a very wealthy family, and they live in a large brick house right in the center of town. They are, of course, a secessionist family in Fairfax, but regardless of which army is occupying the town, the Fords end up playing host to officials, officers, the important people. So she's able to rub elbows with who's who, even though she is in her early 20s when the war breaks out. She starts off the Civil War with a little bit of trouble. Number one, she overhears some gossip happening in the Ford home between Union officers, and so she sneakily skedaddles down to Union Mills and is able to pass on that info to General Beauregard. Jeb Stuart is so enamored and impressed with this action that he makes her a major, an aide-de-camp in the Confederate Army. Of course, he doesn't have the authorization to do this. It's all in good fun, but he gives her, one of those cute, like, signed certificates, an official aide-de-camp in the Confederacy, Antonia Ford. It's all a lot of fun. And she spends 1861 and 1862 nursing soldiers and doing all of the things that you should. Fast forward, in 1863, Fairfax Courthouse becomes the center of one of Northern Virginia's most salacious escapades, and that is the kidnapping of a Union general from his bed in the middle of the night in an occupied town. General Edwin Stoughton is the unlucky target of this kidnapping, of this attack, carried out by one John Singleton Mosby and about 30 of his men, who would later become the 43rd Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, Mosby's Rangers. So they March 9th, they sneak into town in the cover of darkness, they snatch up Edward Stoughton, and they skedaddle back out again. Lincoln famously quips that he can make a general any day, but he's really sore about losing all the horses that the Confederates steal. It just so happens that Stoughton had been all up partying at the Ford's home. His, meaning Stoughton's mother and sister, were in town from New England and were staying with the Fords, right? So that's how closely connected the Ford family is with all of the goings on in town. There were even some rumors after Stoughton was kidnapped that there must have been an inside man or woman in Fairfax who had enabled this kidnapping to take place. So the day that Edwin Stoughton is kidnapped, Mr. Ford, Antonia's father, and 8 other men are sent to jail in the old Capitol Prison in Washington, D.C. But there are rumors floating around that Antonia had a role in it as well. And some of the most salacious rumors are that she and Stoughton were like canoodling in a very un-Victorian fashion. And the basis of these rumors were the fact that Antonia was young and beautiful, and she had been seen on horseback riding around town with Edwin, like on social calls, right? So this,
Scandal.
I know,
Total
the scandal. Nothing ever came of those rumors that she did anything untoward. And in fact, Edwin Stoughton, for his part, was insistent that their relationship was perfectly respectable and there was no funny business. In fact, in addition to Stoughton, Jeb Stuart and later Colonel Mosby himself also said that Antonia had nothing to do with the kidnapping. But that's not good enough. There were forces that were determined to find a connection between Antonia and the kidnapping of Edwin Stoughton. So within days of Stoughton's kidnapping and Mr. Ford's imprisonment, Lafayette Baker, who's the head of the National Detective Agency, who's working with the United States government, gets a call from Secretary of War Edwin Stanton saying, I need you to put a spy on Antonia Ford. I need to know if she's involved with this. And so Lafayette sends a female agent. Her name is Frances Jameson, aka Frankie Abel, to go down to Fairfax Courthouse, pretend to be from New Orleans, like she's stranded there, she's trying to get back to her family. And it takes a kind of silly short amount of time for Antonia to open up to this stranger. Like within a couple of days, Antonia's like, yeah, here's the letter that Jeb Stuart signed, making me an official part of the Confederate Army. Tee hee hee. So Frankie obviously sells her out. So March 9th is when Stoughton is kidnapped. On March 13th, Antonia is imprisoned. So 4 days that they sent down a spy who ratted her out, and then it's impressive. It's very efficient. So Antonia goes to the old Capitol Prison. It's an older building, obviously, in Washington, D.C. It's drafty, it's damp. It's a place to hold civilians, like she's not being tortured, but it's not the funnest place to be. And in fact, we know she's gonna get some kind of long-term illness from this, probably respiratory. But because she is affluent, because she has connections, she's able to get goodies and trinkets sent to her from town. But she also has a gentleman caller while she is in prison in the spring of 1863. And that gentleman caller is none other than hotelier and current major in the United States Army, Joseph Willard is his name. Joseph Willard had incidentally met Antonia in the year before, when he had first enlisted. He had earned his commission and he was being sent down south to Falmouth. And he was an aide-de-camp to General McDowell. And he stayed only a couple of nights in the Ford home, but apparently Antonia had made such an impression that when he found out her circumstances, he went and made sure she was taken care of, right? Flowers, food, candies, company, hanging out with her, whatever it was that she needed, he would see to it. And he also advocated for her release. He was trying to kind of take up her cause. And it's an interesting thought because Antonia, while she was insisting that she was innocent of doing anything malicious or really participating in the war in any way, right? She said, I was nursing soldiers, but I wasn't fighting anybody. But at the same time, of the items that she asked to be sent to her, she includes several specific sheets of music, specifically what we would think of as being Southern anthems, right? Maryland, My Maryland, and Bonnie Blue Flag. And so she's in prison, and I like to imagine that Joseph Willard is there visiting her, but she's just belting out pro-Confederate songs. She's just like screaming and singing as loud as she can because exactly, because she seems to have that kind of attitude, malicious compliance. She's doing what she's told, but she's going to be making it clear what her opinion is. Eventually, in May of that year, so from March to May, she's in prison in the Capitol in the old Capitol jail. And she's eventually exchanged, she's released, but she and Joseph Willard will continue kind of an exchange of letters throughout the summer. And it's all, again, above board, perfectly reasonable. But then in September, she's jailed again, or she's arrested again, I should say. She's arrested again in September, on September 14th of 1863, because she hadn't signed an oath of allegiance when she was exchanged the first time. So it's all a bureaucratic paperwork thing. But knowing Antonia, I think she was really reluctant to take this oath. I think she was perfectly happy to have sneaked out of signing it the first time around. But after spending 2 days under arrest, she finally signs the oath of allegiance, but there's only one other person in the room. There's only one person who witnesses her signing this document, and he signs his name as well, Joseph Willard. So it's possible that he's there kind of like just smoothing it over, trying to make things nice. Whatever the case, it's clear that their relationship is progressing, and it becomes more and more enamored through the fall of 1863, to the point at which at the very end of December 1863, he is proposing marriage, and they're professing their love for each other, which is surprising for Antonia too, because there are records of her exchanging flirty letters with guys in previous years, and like it's clear that she's too cool for them. But she actually seems, interested in and committed to Joseph Willard. There are, however, only a couple of things standing in their way, a couple of uncomfortable truths.
Like the Civil War,
Like the Civil War is one of those things. Willard is currently employed in killing people, not that he was anti-camp, etc., but employed for an army who was acting out acts of war against her neighborhood. Her brother served in Jeb Stuart's artillery, his field artillery unit. So that's awkward, at family functions if that kind of thing is happening. Another tricky spot is that Joseph Willard is 18 years older than Antonia, which is weird even in that era. We often assume that like, oh, old guys married all kinds of teenagers, and that's just not the case in this situation, especially. I think, if I remember correctly, Joseph Willard is only 2 years younger than Antonia's mother, kind of a thing. So that's enough of an age gap that it would raise eyebrows even then. And oh yeah, there's also the little formality that Joseph Willard is currently married to somebody else. So
yeah,
that I guess that happens.
Not to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's a non-relationship goal for those of you at home. So there are a few obstacles this couple has to overcome if they're really going to end up being together. So in December, Joseph Willard writes asking for her hand and her heart. And on December 31st, she writes back to him saying, "You have my heart, and when your hand is free, hint, hint, you can have mine," kind of a thing. But she, in another part of that letter, she writes that her parents and her family will be mortified. That's the word she used. They'll be mortified at the two of them getting married, because even if he resigns his commission, he's still a Yankee. And even if he gets a divorce, that means he's a divorcee, which is also bad, at the time. And for Antonia's family being such prominent members of society, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell. So it's not like removing these obstacles automatically makes everything okay. But the two of them are so dedicated to each other and so in love that they move mountains, to make it happen. So Antonia has already done her part by signing the oath of allegiance to the United States. On February 9th of 1864, Joseph Willard resigns his commission. So only, several weeks later, he resigns his commission On March 2nd, he gets a divorce. That's like a record, no matter what era you're living in, of bureaucracy and law and, you know, whatever else it is. He's able to, I don't know, he's working for the Willard Hotel. He has a history in business. You know, he worked for a while as a cashier, moving money and people from the East Coast to West Coast gold rush time. Like he knows how to make stuff happen. You
Pulls
know,
some strings for sure.
yeah, exactly. So he's able to exert some influence maybe to get this divorce expedited. Divorced on March 2nd, and on March 10th of 1864, Antonia Ford and Joseph Willard get married in the Metropolitan Hotel in Washington, D.C. That's how fast it moves for them right there at the end to make it happen. You know, that's a relationship goal, is you make it happen to be with each other. There's an interesting side note that they had
His
argued.
ex-wife would disagree.
Yes, maybe we're not going to ask Carrie Moore Willard. We're not going to ask. We don't actually know what happens to her after this, really. But I guess that's a tragedy for another day. An interesting side note: after his divorce was finalized, Willard kept asking Antonia, like, "Why don't you just come up here? Just come here so we can get married." And Antonia's parents put their foot down. That, like, you don't get sent for. You know, either he comes to get you or you don't go. Like one of those like pride points kind of a thing. So he does. Joseph Willard comes down to Fairfax Courthouse to collect her, and her parents come too. So the four of them are in this carriage together, riding back north to DC, and that's got to be one of the most awkward road trips to take with your future in-laws, right? Like that's tough. Even tougher is that on their way out of town, they're stopped by a certain Mr. Kinchlow, who is one of Mosby's Rangers, and who would definitely, what's the right word, relieve them of their possessions, right, if given the opportunity. But because Mr. Kinchlow is from Fairfax Courthouse, he recognizes Antonia and lets them pass, thinking that they're Southerners, they're good. Only later does he realize that one of the wealthiest hoteliers in Washington, D.C. got away from him, right? This big fish. So that's kind of a fun little side story. So the Willards are married in March, and they have several probably happy years together. It is very unfortunate that only 2 months after getting married, Antonia's brother Charles dies in combat in the Civil War. So it's one of those things that even true love, you know, and marriage and finding each other, that doesn't stop some of the other forces that were already at work in the world around them. The couple has 3 children together, 3 sons. Only one will survive infancy, but Antonia will pass away only a few years later in 1871. And it's said that this is mostly due to whatever illness she had contracted in the old Capitol prison that just never went away. She never fully recovered from, and also probably partially from grief from losing her 3rd son. She actually died on Valentine's Day, on February 14th, which is another tie-in for this. For his part, Joseph Willard never remarried. He kind of became a recluse. He really sunk himself into his work. He made a lot of money, and he raised his son. And he wrote in his diary it was 1884, April 9th, 1884, he writes that it was snowing outside, just like that day 22 years ago exactly that he first laid eyes on Antonia, my dear, dear Antonia. So he definitely carried that love with him for the rest of his life. And I think that is a relationship goal.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Here.
Now, incidentally, I don't want to belabor the point, I don't want to take so long. There is an interesting heritage area connection to the Willards. The Willards' sole surviving son, Joe, grew up to inherit his father's business and was active in Virginia politics, especially in Fairfax County. And he was such a prominent figure that a small town was named after him, only about 1,000 feet from the county line between Loudoun and Fairfax. Willard was a small crossroads town. It had a post office and some farms and not much else. It was a predominantly African-American village. And in 1958, it was bulldozed so that Dulles Airport could be built on it. So if you're ever traveling in and out of Dulles International Airport, you can know that you're visiting the village of Willard, which is named for Antonia's and Joseph's son.
Yeah, I think Terminal C is right about where the center crossroads of the village was. So it's right there.
Yes, the romantic and picturesque Terminal C.
I don't think any of us are going to be seeing an airport anytime soon. So.
Yeah.
Oh,
I do
probably
love the scandalous carriage rides that you always hear about. It sounds so absurd, but I'm sure that happens all the time now. Like, do you see who got a ride from someone in their car? Kind of thing. It reminds me, I think Allison told the story in the Scandals episode about the Powells and how scandalous it was about who was riding with who on horseback and carriage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I didn't mention this, but true fans of History on Tap might recognize Joseph Willard and the Willard Hotel from the epic fails story that Joe told, right?
That's right.
About the unsuccessful peace convention of 1861, trying to avoid civil war. So that was the Willards Hotel. Incidentally, if the peace convention had succeeded, would the Willards have ever met each other?
I guess that makes it all worth it, huh, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, you know, hundreds of thousands of people dead and displaced. It's one love story.
Yeah.
One love.
And if the Willard Hotel wants us to do a History on Tap there, we will oblige.
We will absolutely go to the Willard Hotel. Yes.
So a couple comments from online watching along. For one, Mike, Emery's husband, is not happy with my pronunciation of the name. I've been challenging my Sicilian heritage that I didn't say it to his liking. My apologies to a fellow Sicilian. James Little, though, is also challenging Anne-Marie taking Travis's thunder with a sad story.
Okay, hold up now. Listen, Jim, before you accuse me, take a look at Joe's story. So just wait. If you think this is sad, dying alone, just you wait.
I don't know if mine's sad, just more maybe grotesque.
I'm just waiting to salvage the whole evening. Like, don't worry, we're gonna end on a good note here.
There's a lot hinging on Catherine's drama and Travis's like upswing.
Oh man.
Feel good.
No pressure.
No pressure, y'all.
We got this, Catherine.
All right, do we have more questions, or should we kick it back a notch to the 18th century?
Let's see. Well, Kate Gruber did love the Frankie name, thinking that it would make
Frankie
a great
Abel,
band name, Frankie Abel. And Chris, I believe Travis's old roommate, has a great title, Willard or Won't He?
Oh, I like that. That's the title of the program. If we go to Willard Hotel. Willard or Won't.
Book us.
Yep.
We have the program ready to go.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Chris.
Make that happen.
Let's backtrack and let's go to another century. George Washington. There's always been rumors about him and his marriage, but we don't know a whole lot about Martha.
That's right.
What do we know about Martha Washington?
Well, I'll start with a little backstory. I portray Martha Washington for Colonial Williamsburg, so I'm, in the costume every day, and I ask for forgiveness if I slip into the wrong pronouns there. But when I first started portraying Martha, of course, I don't look like what you typically think Martha Washington looks like. In fact, I think the first comment I was ever given was in the front yard of Mount Vernon when a guest in the pouring rain said I was too young to be Martha Washington. And I said, well, how young do I have to be? But what it did afford is my opportunity to look into her earlier life rather than just the later life that we often think of as Grandma Martha. And specifically in Williamsburg, she was born in New Kent County, only like 25 miles away from the capital city. And her family and her first marriage, she was very connected to the capital city. So it afforded me a great opportunity to research into her early life, and it really uncovered quite an interesting story of when she was marrying her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis, whom a lot of people don't even know she was married before she married George Washington, because everybody wants to be connected to the big guy. And what really impresses me about the way she is very tenacious in her pursuit of Daniel Parke Custis is you see these same personality traits that echo all the way through her life, which oftentimes people don't ever let Martha have a personality. She's just, the dumpy wife standing beside George Washington, or she's, the one who doesn't let him do anything fun, which I think that's not fair either. But anyway, so she, as I said, was born in New Kent County, and she was the she was the oldest daughter of John and Frances Dandridge of Chestnut Grove, which is an estate right along the Pamunkey, which actually survived, quick side note, untouched really until the 1920s or 30s, when the Crump family owned it, and they still own the property, but they were going to have a family reunion and lit some fires in the old house to air it out. And a fire got out of control and burned it down.
No.
I know. So it was very tragic. But she was born at Chestnut Grove in 1731, between 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning. But she grew up pretty much out in New Kent County. Her father was the clerk to New Kent County from the moment he arrived in New Kent to his dying day. Her mother was of the great Jones family of the Williamsburg area. So her grandfather was Orlando Jones. Her great grandfather was Roland Jones, the first rector of Bruton Parish, all this stuff. So she was gentry, but not like Randolph and Lee and all those family gentry. But when she was about 16, 17 years old, much like most young ladies of the time, she started thinking about that next great step in her life, that of marriage. And she didn't really have to look very far, because her next door neighbor was I won't say young man, because I have you beaten, Anne-Marie. Her neighbor was 20 years her senior.
Wow.
Named Daniel Parke Custis. And he owned an estate which was just a few miles away from Chestnut Grove called the White House. Not the White House, but guess what color it was? It was white.
It was the first the White House.
A White House. Whenever guests ask me if I lived in the White House, I say, yeah, I did, but not the one you're thinking of. And she and Daniel formed a very fast attachment. Daniel, as I said, was 20 years her senior, was never married. And a lot of that was owing to his father, John Custis IV, whom had a very tumultuous marriage with a woman named Frances Parke Custis, to the point where they had a legal document drawn up that they both had to sign saying that they wouldn't call one another vile names in public.
Ugh. Not relationship goals.
Not relationship goals.
Although maybe a goal, put everything in writing. I don't know.
She passed away when Daniel Parke Custis, her son, was 4 of smallpox, and I'm pretty sure it was her husband's happiest day of his life. Thankfully, he never remarried. And but he put all of his paranoia about his legacy into his son, because Daniel was at that point the sole heir of the Custis estate. So he was going to inherit it all. And it just made John Custis very fixated on his son in particular. So he didn't allow him to go to Europe to be educated. He didn't allow him really outside of his purview until Daniel was 24 years old, when he finally allowed him to go manage the White House out in New Kent County, 25 miles away from Williamsburg. Including, he didn't allow Daniel to marry. And Daniel was a Custis. His father was a member of the governor's council. In fact, his father almost was the acting governor of Virginia for a hot second. Thank God that didn't happen. But and he was engaged several times, but every single engagement, including to his own cousin Annie Bird out at Westover, John Custis broke, because the young lady was not good enough for the heir of the Custis estate, right? Okay, so Daniel is now out in New Kent County at the White House, still fighting with his father, even to the point where he got written out of John Custis's will at one point because he dared ask for shoes for the slaves at White House estate. Thankfully,
these are some pretty big red flags. right here.
You
like-
know, I really wonder sometimes why she fought so hard. But anyway,
I'm
so
also gonna say now that we need to bring you back in case we ever do a daddy issues episode. Because
y'all,
that's
Yeah.
prime.
yeah,
For
she,
real.
yeah, it could like take over the whole time. But she and Daniel had grown up. Well, she had grown up next to Daniel because again, he's 20 years older than her. They were both members of St. Peter's Parish. He was a member of the vestry along with her father. There's even one source that says Daniel Park Custis might have been her godfather, but I haven't found anything to verify that. And that just honestly creeps me out. But anyway, when Martha was about 17 years old, she and Daniel decided that they were madly in love and they were going to be married. Well, Martha's mother, I can only assume, was thrilled with the notion because her oldest daughter was marrying a Custis. And that comes with all the trappings of being a Custis. Unfortunately, Daddy Custis found out, and he was not too pleased about it. And in fact, he was so not pleased about it that he started giving away all of the Custis silver and paintings and everything that he could, specifically the bulk of it going to a tavern keeper named Anne Moody, who lived down on Capitol Landing Road, if any of you are familiar with Williamsburg. And we know all about this because later on, Daniel Park Custis took her to court to get his stuff back. And we have the deposition where she says, well, John Custis said that he would rather throw the Custis silver into the streets of Williamsburg than let a Dandridge have her hand on it.
Oh man.
Charming. It probably did. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, she had an uphill battle. Daniel, not to be dissuaded, asked, instead of going to his father directly to say, no, I want to marry this 17-year-old daughter of a clerk of New Kent County, he asked his friends in Williamsburg to go talk to Dad for him. John Blair went first, and then Thomas Lee also went. Both of them encouraging Daniel to just man up and talk to Dad himself. Daniel, of course, wouldn't do it because his father was horrible to him. Thomas Lee even said, well, fine, if you're not going to tell your father, marry her and then tell him later, which that wouldn't have gone over well either. Well, finally, this is going on for about a year. Finally, Martha, it seems, had enough of it. And she decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands. So she's 17 years old. And she apparently trots herself in from New Kent County and goes and have a little meeting with John Custis IV. Now, we don't know what happened. We don't know what was said. I would love to know what was said. But we do know that it happened because James Power, an attorney in Williamsburg, who was also a friend of Daniel, wrote to Daniel. And this was after he himself also went over to Custis Square to attempt to talk John Custis into it. And actually, this is a weird side note. John Custis, we believe, had a son with an enslaved woman named Jack, whom he was in love with. James Power brought his own son's horse and bridle and saddle to give to that enslaved child in order to butter John Custis up. Anyway, but he writes to Daniel afterwards, and I'll read it over. He said, he willingly consents to your marriage with Miss Dandridge, that he has so good a character of her that he had rather you should have her than any lady in Virginia. Nay, if possible, he is just as much enamored with her character as you are, and this is owing chiefly to a prudent speech of her own.
Whoa.
So she apparently went and had some words with John Custis.
Right on.
He also ends the letter by saying, but seriously, if you're going to marry her before the old man changes his mind. Thankfully, they didn't have to wait long because old man Custis died in November of 49. They waited until May of 1750 to marry, and they did marry. We believe they married at Chestnut Grove, and then they went 4 miles upriver to White House Estate, where they made their house. They had 7, from what we can tell, extremely happy years of marriage. He absolutely doted on her, bought her anything she wanted. They had 4 children, 2 of which survived their father passing away. Of course, Martha would outlive all of her children eventually. But unfortunately, Daniel, to round the story out, Daniel would pass away very suddenly, remembering he's 20 years older than Martha and didn't lead a very stress-free life. He falls, there's an illness that was going around the Pamunkey. It's the summer, the children are stricken with some throat infection, it seems it was. Her son, John Park Custis, is taken down with it, and Dr. Carter of Williamsburg is called out. But unfortunately, right as Jackie is recovering, Daniel is stricken with it. He is stricken on July 4th. So Martha doesn't have a good reason to celebrate July 4th really for a while. And he's dead by July 8th.
Wow.
So he is passed away. He dies with no will. So he dies intestate, which that it isn't the end of the world, as we know, because dower rights and everything are pretty solid at this time. But it leaves her as the administratrix of the entirety of the Custis estate, which at Daniel's death was over 17,700 acres spread over 6 counties, 300 enslaved, bank stocks, you name it, she's in charge of it. And she deals with it. Everything comes from her pen. At one point, a lawyer tries to take advantage of her. And once again, she trots herself into Williamsburg and has a little chat with him. And she is a very wealthy widow for a while until, as we all know, this, as it is George Washington's birthday, she is introduced to, I know, raise a glass, introduced or reintroduced, as we like to say, to Colonel George Washington at her friend's house, and they marry on 12th night of 59. So she gets a second chance and seemingly has a very happy second marriage. And he, of course, is a wonderful stepfather to her 2 children that she brings to the marriage. So I think that part of her life is very much overlooked in a lot of ways. And it's a very formative time in her life. And she just has a lot of chutzpah, she doesn't take shit, excuse my language,
for
anyone. But you see it repeated throughout her life. She's not a passive observer. She manages Mount Vernon with an iron fist. She attends Washington at every single winter encampment. She's there during the 2 terms of the presidency, which, by the way, were horrible for them. And she is loyal and fiercely dedicated to those that she loves. And she just, she has a lot of very human personality traits that I don't think a lot of times historians allow her to have. So it's always fun to be able to tell her early life stories because she was quite a character.
I really like that, because it does seem as though for George Washington to be the great leader and the father of our country, it means that the women near him have to be all the way down here, in terms of their personality, in terms of how loud, whether literally or figuratively, they're allowed to be. You see that with Martha, you see that with his mother, that if they have opinions, then they're harpies, and it's so refreshing to hear a story about a woman with chutzpah, that like is a real person, isn't just the mom.
And she, they had a very, what we always say in Williamsburg is that they were equals, because she was the socially dominant one when she marries George Washington. She's definitely more socially elevated than he is, and she brings him up. And also she's managing all of that Custis stuff that, she doesn't just dump it on his desk and go, whew, I don't have to worry about that anymore. She's actively still working with him on all that. And one of my favorite eulogies for her was somebody described her as the worthy partner of the worthiest of men, which I always love that they describe her as a worthy partner, not a wife, not,
Yes,
consort.
that is a relationship goal.
There you go.
Finding a worthy partner.
Yes.
Worthy partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, first ladies really get shortchanged in a lot of ways. I mean, there's some fascinating individuals who have significant lives and roles, but sometimes get either ignored or mischaracterized.
Yeah.
We've got a pretty good group chat going. Martha Washington really got a pop from the crowd.
All right, get it.
Kate thinks this is an episode of 90 Day Fiance, which I'm not.
I like that.
And we've also got a little bit of debate of the merits of prenups. Mary Frances says it's a definite relationship goal. You got to get it signed.
She didn't have one though, either time.
And Drew counters with that the prenup won't do much good if it's already in the river.
There you go. Well, yeah.
Little insight to Drew's, personal thoughts there.
Drew's whiskey stash is going into the river.
Yeah. Speaking of going in the river.
Right. Any more Martha Washington questions from you two before we move on? Or
I think you're up, Joe.
All right, everyone get ready. It's gonna be
Let's bring
Little
this
rough.
mood down.
this next portion is PG-13 or higher. I don't know, Joe.
I don't know. Catherine went pretty PG-13 on us there.
Oh, I could go
Yeah, that
rated
is
like
the
R for that
second time
family.
someone has done that on one of our shows.
No, if you ever want a rated R story, I'll tell you about Daniel's grandfather, Daniel Park of the Leeward Islands, and how he met his end.
All right, we're gonna have to do a history on tap after dark for that,
yes,
with like parental supervision.
Yeah.
But I think that might be necessary.
And
Oh,
We
yeah.
are absolutely doing that. Yeah.
All right, Joe, take it away.
All right, so I'm going to tell a story that some people have maybe heard before, or at least heard part of it. I became particularly familiar with this story when I worked at Manassas Battlefield back around 2009, 2010, 11. People would constantly, I wasn't constantly, but regularly bring up the story of Sullivan Ballou. He was just a major from Rhode Island for the Union Army at the battle. But it wasn't so much Ballou, it was a letter that was connected with him. And the reason it became so famous was because of Ken Burns' Civil War documentary from the 1990s. In that documentary, to the tune of Ashokan Farewell in the background, I think it's David McCullough reads this letter of Sullivan Ballou to his wife. And that set it off really a firestorm of people wanting to know more about this letter and of Sullivan Ballou. So I want to get into a little bit about the letter, some controversy behind it, and a little bit of what actually happened to Ballou.
Are you going to read the letter with a Rhode Island accent?
Well, I don't know what that sounds like, so I'm going to say yes. This is my impersonation of a Rhode Island accent. It's a long letter, so I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing, but I did pick out a few sections, so at least to give you a sense of what is said in this letter, which is why it became such a really national phenomenon for people who watched the Ken Burns documentary. So he writes this from camp in Washington, D.C., a week before the Battle of First Manassas, and he writes it to his wife, Sarah. So on July 14th, he writes, "I feel compelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eyes when I shall be no more. If it is necessary that I should fall on the battlefield for my country, I am ready. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the revolution. I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless, excuse me. He's probably breathless too. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all those chains to the battlefield. The memories of all the blissful moments I've spent with you come creeping over me, and I feel most gratified to God and you that I've enjoyed them so long. I have, I know, but few small claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me. Perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar, that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, and when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name."
Aw.
All of my self-control not to start humming Ashokan Farewell while you're reading that.
While you were gone for a second, so this all to the background of Ashokan Farewell, which I thought about even doing for this. But towards the end, in one of the last moments, again, it's a long letter, but it's just a few sections of it, he writes, "But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they loved, I shall always be near you. In the gladdest days and the darkest nights, advise to your happiest scenes and gloomiest hours, always, always. And there be a soft breeze upon your cheek, it shall be my breath. Or a cool air cools through your throbbing temple, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone and wait for thee, for we shall meet again."
That's a really beautiful and classy way to say, if I die, I'm gonna haunt you.
Yeah, way to make it all about him. It's a very over the top. I mean, some people might be running to throw up from hearing that. Others might be thinking, this is so romantic. So this is a story for hopeless romantics, for skeptics and cynics. So for people hearing that, again, they wanted to know more about the guy who wrote this glowingly, well-written letter to his wife a week before the battle. But I want to give some backstory. So who is Sullivan Ballou that is tied to this letter? He grows up in Rhode Island. He does for a time actually teach oratory, which makes sense, then pay attention with the letter. But then he's also studying law and then gets admitted to the bar and ultimately ends up as a state representative in Rhode Island. And he marries Sarah Hart Shumway in 1855. Now, as he's kind of a young, growing politician in Rhode Island, he befriends a very young governor, William Sprague. And the two of them are Republicans. They strongly support Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And when the war begins in early 1861, Sullivan Ballou gets named a major when he gets commissioned by the governor for the 2nd Rhode Island Infantry. He has no military experience, but it helps to have political connections when commissions are being handed out. So he goes with the 2nd Rhode Island down to Washington, D.C. in the lead up to the first major engagement of the war. And while in camp, he writes several times to his wife, Sarah. So we have several letters in Ballou's handwriting to his wife in the lead up to the Battle of First Bull Run, or First Manassas. On July 14th, there's now, though, considered 2 letters that are written to Sarah. One of them we know is legitimate. We can compare it with his handwriting. We have the original document and letter to know that this was his. And it matches a lot of his writing that he wrote in previous letters in terms of he's brisk, he's optimistic in his letters. He's not particularly worried about dying in an upcoming battle. He talks about personal things, details about what's going on in camp, about the prospect of using the war afterwards to progress his political career. So you see some of these things in the July 14th letter, but then this letter that I just read a part of is also supposed to be from July 14th. And there are some questions that do get raised about this letter. So some backstory on the letter itself. The first time it appears is in the 1860s. After the war, in 1868, a friend of his named Horatio Rogers wrote a book about Brown University soldiers during the Civil War. And he gives some biographies of them, Sullivan Ballou being one, and he puts the letter in that book. And that's really the first time that there's any sort of known account of this letter. And he writes how it was basically a perfect epitaph for someone like Sullivan. The letter doesn't pop up until the 1880s then in terms of being known by other individuals. It then pops up in a relative of the Ballous who writes about it in a family book, but it basically looks like he got that information from Rogers' book. From that point, again, continuously unknown until the 1960s, when Bruce Catton comes across the letter and various manifestations of the letter that pop up in manuscripts throughout the country. In the 1970s, Edward Longacre writes about it. And then when it came to Ken Burns doing the documentary, or a famed historian, Don Fehrenbacher, showed it to Ken Burns, and that's how it made its way into the Ken Burns documentary. And within that, that's how it then became so well known. But then individuals wondering again more about this, and of course that brings scrutiny. And when people took a more critical eye to the letter, there became some doubt about who actually wrote this, about whether it was Sullivan Ballou or not. When people compare the writing of, say, the July 14th letter that we know was his, it's not totally uncommon, but it is somewhat uncommon to write multiple letters in one day to the same person. Also, when you compare the other letters previously to that one to this one, the style of writing, the words being used just don't really seem to align with the other letters. Now, the reason why there's in question is we don't know what happened to the original of the letter. The only copies we have of this are copies of the letter done by someone else, so no original. What happened to that if there was an original? Also in doubt. Ken Burns believes that it was buried with his wife, Sarah, after the trunk of Sullivan Ballou gets delivered to Sarah after his death and the letter was in it. The biographer, one of the biographers of Sullivan Ballou in a 2006 book about Ballou, says it's absolutely written by Sullivan Ballou. She says it's really just conspiracy buffs who doubt it, and she says there's no doubt in her mind. He was a teacher of oratory. He was a good writer, and claims it was definitely his. Others, though, do disagree. Someone in the English department at UVA said if it was one of his students that presented all those letters, the letter particularly we're talking about would be considered plagiarized because it doesn't match up with the other writings from Ballou. Another historian at Cornell agreed, saying that when you just look at the type of writing, the style, the tone, it just doesn't match up. No other letters of Ballou's talk about love of government and in such a patriotic, sacrificial sense of it. He certainly writes about care about his family and wanting to see them, but not in such a flowery way. So there's still very much debate and kind of cold water thrown on the idea that this was written by Ballou. If he didn't write it, though, who did then becomes the question. And some suspect potentially it was Horatio Rogers, who was looking for a way in which potentially to console the widow, Sarah Ballou. Maybe he thought this would be a great addition to the book he was doing about soldiers in this Brown University book, and that he was a friend of Ballou and wanted to improve the standing of Ballou in terms of memory, but also show the patriotic sense of fighting the war also. So kind of use this as a time to write a model way for a soldier being away from home and sacrificing everything for love of country and preservation of the Union. So there's still very much debate about this letter that's captivated so many people's attention.
Or was it Joe Rizzo?
That's right.
Dun, dun, dun.
My writing typically has put people to sleep, not necessarily captivated people's attention for my previous writing. Now for Ballou, of course, we can never get the answer from him because he writes this on July 14th, and he is in the Battle of First Manassas. He is with the 2nd Rhode Island, who are engaged on Matthews Hill in the morning fighting, and a cannonball from some Confederate soldiers, some of the ones he was fighting, though, do have a Loudon connection. Shanks Evans, who then after this occupies Leesburg and the defenses, is some of the officers he's fighting against on Matthews Hill. But Ballou takes a cannonball to the right leg, it takes it off, kills the horse under him, and then he's taken nearby to Selby Church, where he dies a week after the battle from those wounds. Fascinating story. Maybe I'll save it for a different day in which that we need to tell a little more graphic stories. But for Ballou himself, not only do we not know the origins and what happened about the letter, but even his corpse then becomes a mystery and a debate, where Confederate soldiers after the battle occupy Selby Church area and that part of Northern Virginia. When they evacuate in the spring of 1862, that then opens the door for people to come back and get the bodies of the Union soldiers who had passed. And the governor of Rhode Island wants to reclaim Ballou, his friend, and the colonel of the 2nd Rhode Island, John Slocum. So he and others go down to reclaim both these corpses, and they're led to near the by spot in Selby Church where they're supposed to be. When they dig up the first one, they realize there's no grave there. It's empty. And they think that was John Slocum then who's missing. And a nearby girl tells them of a story, a brutal story of how Confederate soldiers, probably from the 21st Georgia, dug up the grave, mutilated the body, cut off the head, burned the rest of the body, took some parts of the bones for souvenirs, threw the coffin into the river, and then evacuated. Yeah, and at first they didn't almost believe it, but then they actually found ashes and pieces of bone to back that up. But then one of the individuals with the party noticed in the trees 2 shirts that he knew belonged to Ballou. And then they started looking more, and they went to the other grave, dug that up, and it was indisputably Colonel Slocum, which meant that the body that actually was mutilated was Ballou's. And they must have thought it was the colonel, and that's why, because it had a better coffin than what was wrapped around Slocum in his burial. So they thought it was the colonel, but it was Ballou's corpse actually that they did that to. But those individuals did kind of recoup the ashes of Ballou along with other possessions of Ballou that had already been recovered, and those shirts, and then did give those to Sarah Ballou after that point.
Yeah, that's
Happy
a downer.
Valentine's Day.
But it was
everybody.
a great letter that has captured the attention of millions of people and motivated people to be interested in history, in the war, and go to the location. For better
Okay.
or worse, for those who
Okay.
are there.
All right.
I will say, I was refreshing my memory about the blue letter last week when you said that you were going to tell that story, and I thought we were going to go on a bent about how that letter is a love letter to America, right? And like patriotism and duty, and like you took a different tack with it, and it's a bummer. I'm trying to figure out a relationship goal to derive here, I guess, is
Have someone who's going to be a ghostwriter for you if you're not going to do it yourself, maybe.
maybe it's that relationship goal. It's between you and your ghostwriter.
Yeah, and
Right?
it could have been him. I'm not going to say it definitely wasn't him. He may have written it. Again, he did teach oratory. He was, a good writer. Maybe it was him. Maybe he kind of had an epiphany that an upcoming battle was going to be it for him, and maybe he changed his tune later in the day. I don't know.
I like to imagine, and this is purely conjecture, they're in camp in DC. He writes the first letter, like feeling confident, feeling good, and then he hears everyone else around him composing their letters, and everyone else, is scared ishless, right, about going into battle. And he's like, oh, this is real. But then he also hears them composing their letters badly, so he decides to school everyone and write the best farewell note possible.
Yeah. And for anyone who's interested in the letter, go on YouTube, and I'm sure you can find many examples of a Ashokan farewell from the clip from the documentary. I mean, you can see why it became really the biggest hit of that, and why so many people wanted to know more.
Yeah, I think we should start. I
And
think
then
we should start the conspiracy theory that Ashokan farewell was written on the back of that letter. They were written to go together.
So I'm sorry for taking Travis's downer spotlight. Maybe we should have qualified this as like a depressing Valentine's Day.
No, because I'm gonna bring the mood back up. I actually have, for once, a happy story to share. So
All the single ladies.
all the single Quaker ladies. So I'm gonna share one of my favorite local history stories. And that is the story of two remarkable young Quaker ladies during the Civil War, Lizzie and Lida Dutton. At the time of the Civil War, the time the war starts, Lizzie is 21 years old. She's the oldest of 5 children. Her younger sister Lida is 16 at the start of the war, and they are 2 of 5 children of a prominent Quaker merchant businessman by the name of John Dutton, who lives in Waterford, Virginia, just a short ways west of Leesburg. John Dutton, before the Civil War, very well known within the Quaker community, very outspoken opponent of slavery. There's even some evidence that he was a participant on the Underground Railroad, certainly very probable within that Quaker community in Waterford. And when the Civil War breaks out, when Virginia votes on secession, although the vast majority of people in Loudoun County are going to vote for secession, John Dutton, many of his neighbors in Waterford, as well as the nearby German settlement of Lovettsville, Virginia, are going to vote against secession. I think the vote in Waterford is like 220 against versus 31 for secession. So it's overwhelmingly against it. And it creates this pocket of unionist sentiment within the northwestern part of Loudoun County that's going to kind of be caught between 2 fires during the Civil War. They are held with intense suspicion by their pro-Confederate neighbors, as well as by Northerners across the Potomac in Maryland and in the Union States. They're cut off from the North. They're living under blockade. They can't get the goods that they want from the North. But at the same time, Their village is being visited by Confederate partisans. You've got guys like Lige White, John Mosby raiding these outspoken pro-unionists, stealing their supplies, their horses, their food. You've got soldiers from both sides marching through town, again, taking supplies. So it's really a pretty awkward position for these Unionist Quakers. John Dutton, Lizzie and Lida's father, is going to have to flee to Maryland several times during the war to avoid arrest. He's arrested by Confederate authorities on a few occasions. Their brother James is going to have to leave Virginia to avoid conscription into the Confederate Army. He actually finds his way into a Maryland regiment serving in the U.S. Army. So what happens is that leaves the Dutton women there in Waterford, basically trying to hold things together. They're trying to manage the family business. Again, they're blockaded. Their store is, the shelves are emptying rapidly at the Dutton family store. They do what they can to provide aid and support to Union soldiers as they pass through the area. So they're going to provide medical care. They're going to provide information, comfort, food. But finally, in the spring of 1864, these two Dutton sisters, Lizzie and Lida, are going to take things a step further. And they, together with their cousin Sarah Steer, are going to do something that I think is pretty remarkable. They are going to start essentially an illegal underground pro-Union newspaper in Confederate Virginia. Now, I just want to share this picture very quickly. These are the girls we're talking about here. These are Lizzie and Lida. Lida there in the polka dot dress, Lizzie on the other hand. So again, they're pretty young. When they start this paper, Lida's only 19 years old. Lizzie is 24. Taking a huge risk. Their home is going to be raided by Confederate partisans throughout the war because they know that these ladies are up to what they would consider sedition or treason within the Confederate States. So when I say they write a newspaper, they're going to write out the copy for this paper. They are going to smuggle the copy across the Potomac River, typically over to Brunswick, Maryland, have the paper printed in Maryland, and they're going to sell it for 10 cents a copy. And all the proceeds of the Waterford News are going to go to funding the Sanitary Commission, so for the relief of wounded and sick Union soldiers. Now, it must have been incredibly popular with the soldiers along the Potomac River because they raise $1,000 for Union soldier relief at 10 cents a copy. So,
Awesome.
this is, they're a pretty popular publication. So what's inside the Waterford News? Well, there's patriotic poetry. The very front page of the first issue is going to have a poem, to Abraham Lincoln. There's another one in support of the Union soldiers that are fighting against the Confederacy, against slavery. There's going to be local news, troop movements, skirmishes that happen in the area. One of the ongoing columns is actually about a pothole that appears in the middle of one of the streets in Waterford, and like how they're begging the men of the town to do something about it. Nobody does anything about it. So finally, they call on the ladies to fill the pothole in. There's a really nice follow-up to that where they have a fake letter to the editor from a local pig who's complaining that the pothole has been filled in because he loved this mud hole so much. A lot of that actually really speaks to the sense of humor that these ladies have. They're in the middle of a civil war. Their family has been divided. Their family has been kind of scattered to the winds. They're facing these privations, these shortages, and yet they approach all this with a tremendous sense of humor. In one issue from the summer of 1864, they actually have a wanted page, like a classified ads. They're wanted a big pound sponge loaf or ginger cake to be distributed amongst the Union ladies of Waterford who haven't tasted any for so long. Again, speaking to the shortages that are happening in town. Wanted a few stores with dry goods, molasses candy, and other stationery suited to the tastes of the community. Young and handsome clerks, not objectionable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because not only are they lacking in candy and fabric and clothes and things like that. But all the men of the town have kind of, been scattered to the winds as well.
They don't just want molasses candy, they want some eye candy.
Eye candy,
go
yes,
with it.
absolutely. Yeah, just below that wanted ad, they wanted a few young surgeons to mend our broken hopes.
Oh,
I know, yeah, it's sweet.
a little saucy.
Yeah. We tend to think of Quakers as pretty stuffy people, but certainly the Dutton sisters, they're putting it out there. Again, speaking to their sense of humor, they have really, really bad like dad jokes
Yes.
in the pages of the Waterford News. One of my favorite is, what is the most fashionable hood worn in the South?
I know this one.
What is it, Anne-Marie? What's the punchline?
It's a falsehood.
A falsehood.
Heyo.
Yeah. What kind of rations are dealt out plentifully by the rebel leaders to their soldiers? Exaggerations.
Exaggeration.
Yeah, there's a great one about like McClellan, like, what's the McClellan's resignation is like the best nation. Like, I mean, they're with it. Their jokes are a little corny, but so one of the columns that's kind of most pertinent to today's theme, though, is the marriage column. Any good 19th century newspaper is going to have a marriage column. But in the middle of the Civil War, the marriage column of the Waterford News is kind of a sad place. The very first one that appears in the summer of 1864 is marriages, and it's just completely blank. Yeah, I can show you. Here's the marriage column, as you can see. And up above it says, "Young men, will you see this should be interesting place vacant when you could easily remedy it?" Unfortunately for the ladies,
Let's add it to the list of vacant spots. So there's the hole that's vacant that needs to be filled in. We've got this vacant classifieds article.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately for these ladies, the marriage column kind of continues like this for a while. This is from, again, kind of later on in 1864. Marriages, we hope to fill this vacancy ere long. Now, one of the things I love about this is there are Union soldiers over in Maryland who are reading this paper, and they are definitely sending letters to these saucy Quaker ladies, because you can see, after it appears vacant for a few months, there's a response basically saying, well, ever since we put this vacant marriage column up, all the boys are now writing us letters. Well, they should actually do something about it and not keep us waiting.
The DMs were sliding left to right from the baton.
Yeah, I love, again, the confidence of these ladies, the sense of humor that they're approaching all this with. So despite the vacant marriage columns, both Lizzie and Lida are going to find love during the Civil War. As I said before, although most of the local men are away, trying to avoid being conscripted or arrested by the Confederate authorities, soldiers from both sides are going to be frequent visitors to the town. In late July of 1863, just a few weeks after Gettysburg, the 7th Indiana Infantry is going to come marching into town, and they are completely blown away, because here they are in Virginia, and yet when they march into the town, they are celebrated, they're feasted. All the people of the town come out to celebrate their arrival. And during this kind of celebration, a 27-year-old lieutenant from Indiana named David Holmes is going to meet Lizzie Dutton, the older of the two sisters. The two really seem to hit it off, because they strike up this very warm correspondence, and pretty soon, correspondence. Now I'm just imagining like what the 21st century version of like texting back and forth would be.
Oh, slide into her DMs.
He slid into her DMs, and even after the regiment marches away, they keep this up, and pretty soon they've agreed on an engagement, and that the two of them will be married once the war is over.
Sadly, that's what I want to know.
What's that?
Was there a prenup conversation had?
Yeah.
Or anything thrown into the river by Virginians.
So these letters continue back and forth until the following summer, the summer of 1864, when Lizzie gets an unexpected letter from a guy named Joshua Dunlap, who's a fellow officer in the 7th Indiana. And Dunlap shares with her the incredibly tragic news that her fiance has been killed in battle outside of Petersburg. Now, Dunlap and Lizzie do exchange a few letters. You know, he was very close with her fiance. They kind of friendly letters back and forth. But once the war is over, Dunlap returns to Indiana. He marries his childhood sweetheart. And that's kind of the last that Lizzie Dutton hears from anyone in the 7th Indiana. Now, I did say there is a happy ending to this story, because in 1882, many years after they had last corresponded, Joshua Dunlap is in Washington, D.C. on business. He's traveling from Indiana. His first wife, who he had married just after the Civil War ended, died tragically 2 years after they were married. And for some reason, Lizzie Dutton came to mind while he was in Washington, D.C., and he wrote her a letter, you know, just kind of checking in to see on how she was doing. And I guess found out she was still single, because within a few days of writing her, he gets a letter back that she's still in Waterford, Virginia, and he hops on the W&OD railroad and takes a trip out to Waterford. He sees Lizzie Dutton, and just a few short weeks after that, he is back in Indiana preparing his home for his new bride. The two of them get married in January 1882, and they actually live several decades. They spend about 40 years together as a married couple. So Lizzie Dutton, although she lost her first fiance during the war, you know, she does find love with one of his former comrades. She'll move out to Indiana, and the two of them will live a long and happy life together. So here's to Lizzie and Joshua Dunlap.
That is relationship goals.
Well, it gets even better, because her sister Lida also finds love during the war. And this is one of my favorite stories of the Civil War. So Lida Dutton is walking the streets of Waterford one day when she notices a very strangely dressed cavalryman riding down the street looking for directions. He's alone. He seems lost. He's asking for directions. Now, again, Lida's pretty suspicious of this. As a good Quaker woman and as a good Union woman, she does not want to give any aid or comfort to the enemy. So she approaches with a bit of skepticism. This guy's asking for directions. And so what Lida's going to do is she's going to give the most like ridiculously convoluted directions she possibly can. So the guy's asking how to, you know, some directions out of town, and she gives him, she says, well, you take a left at Brown's Stump, you know, and then a right at Uncle Harmon's Well, a left at Zilpa's Rock, like as if any of this makes sense to anyone who is not from Waterford, Virginia. And this cavalryman is getting more and more frustrated as this goes on. And so finally, he's just so agitated, he looks at her and he says, quote, "Miss, which side would you like me to be on?" And young Lida Dutton shouts out, "If you're a rebel, I hate you. But if you're a Northerner, I love you." Well, luckily for Lida Dutton, the cavalryman unbuttons his jacket and opens it up, revealing that it has been turned inside out. You know, it's all blue wool with eagle buttons on the inside. He is a Union cavalryman. He's actually an officer, Lieutenant John Hutchinson of the 13th New York Cavalry. He's been separated from his unit. He had turned his coat inside out to kind of blend in or to avoid suspicion. So John Hutchinson is kind of taken by this young Quaker woman who has declared her love for him, kind of unseen or unknown. The first encounter is kind of awkward, but throughout the rest of the war, Hutchinson's unit is going to be stationed in Loudoun County. So the two of them are going to run into each other repeatedly through the war. Lyda is actually going to provide some really useful military intelligence to him through the course of the war. And sure enough, at the end of the war, Lieutenant Hutchinson is going to return to Waterford, and he's going to hold Lyda Dutton to her word. If she loves him, they get married. Hutchinson actually converts to the Quaker Church. The two of them get married, and then they're going to move to his native New York. And they are going to spend 53 happily married years together. And we know a lot about the story because one of their grandchildren is going to relate this story in the 20th century and say that as a child, John would take her to his knee and tell them the story about how he and her grandmother met during the Civil War. And she said he would only ever hold his grandchildren with one hand because his other hand was always holding Lyda's. So I know, isn't that sweet? I love this story. So here's to the happy endings of Lizzie and Lyda Dutton, Waterford, Virginia's very own saucy Quaker girls.
I do like to think that the Waterford News was like the original "My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard," right? Like my newspaper brings all the hot clerks to the neighborhood.
Well, when she says, if you're a rebel, I hate you. If you're a northerner, I love you. That is like, in the 21st century, that'd be like rebels swipe left.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, big swipe left if you secede from the Union.
Yeah. You can
but again,
secede from my profile. How about that?
Tremendously cool series of documents. 8 issues of the Waterford News exist. If you're interested, the Waterford Foundation has reproduced all of them. So if you're into like really bad jokes about the Civil War and young Quaker ladies looking for love, check
and
out
you can buy them at the Loudon Museum.
Yes.
Good
There you go.
plug.
The comment section loves saucy Quakers, apparently. It's really moving the dial on the comment section. But Jenny has maybe my favorite comment so far, saying you can't blame them for needing important rations like eye candy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh man.
We could spend a whole show just like on the jokes from the Waterford News. There's a great wanted section. Wanted, a cane to support one of our editors' lame conundrums.
Heyo.
Wanted, a straitjacket for the editor who was bent on having her own way.
Drama.
Yeah. So
That's
obviously they're having some fun with it.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of like internal struggle just as a person who has 3 sisters trying to like write and produce a newspaper together. Someone wouldn't have made it right to the end of that.
Especially if they're all competing over like 3 guys in Waterford during the war.
Yeah, because all the men are either in the army or like hiding in Maryland. So.
Or they're secessionists.
Yeah, you basically have to hope like some of Mosby's troops or Elijah White's troops like camp out for the winter and they're just there just by happenstance.
Hey Joe, what kind of key will it take to unlock the southern ports? A Yankee.
Oh,
Heyo.
God.
I love it.
And with that,
You know they were laughing, being like, "These are terrible, but we love them anyways."
yeah.
Yes. I really enjoy kind of a similar thread to like these Quaker women as Martha Dandridge being like, we assume they start life at 70 years old, right? If you're a Quaker, you're already ancient, right? And Martha didn't exist until she was, wearing the gigantic mob cap and, living at Mount Vernon. So I really like that we've had an opportunity to like, let's peel back to their like saucy rule breaking roots, just a lot of interesting aspects to historical figures.
And relationship goal, shoot your shot. Write a newspaper if you have to.
That's it.
There you
That's
go.
the goal. Shoot your shot.
Just smart, great sense of humor, obviously committed to the cause, helping out any way they can. They literally put their money where their mouth is. They raise all this money for the soldiers. Love the Dutton sisters. Can't say enough about them.
Wipe right on the dot. So what do you all have going on at Virginia Piedmont in the next few weeks or so?
Well, we are about to release our schedule of events for the spring and summer. Again, we're still living in a COVID world, so we are going to have some online events. We're going to have a discussion coming up on the 13th of March.
Yeah, but I was going to talk about the 22nd when we're doing George Washington video series. We're going to visit some locations across the heritage area. We're going to adopt a proven method of talking about George and go to places where George slept here, famously throughout the 18th century. Some really fun French and Indian War and Revolutionary War era sites across the heritage area. So if you're interested in the 18th century, these peaks that Katharine has given us tonight, you might want to tune in again on the 22nd. Those will be pre-recorded Facebook videos that will go live that day.
Yep. We're going to have some live online programming about local African-American jockeys who made an impact on the equestrian industry in this area.
Great.
Later on in the spring and early summer, we're hoping to have some socially distanced outdoor events, some history hikes and horseback rides, a bike ride along the C&O Canal. But again, all of that is going to come out in the next few weeks. We're going to have a great program, schedule of programs coming up in the spring and early summer.
But I know that, Joe, you guys are cooking a brand new exhibition.
We are.
Yeah.
We're closed right now, but only for a few more weeks. We are doing some pretty major renovations inside the museum. We're still going to have the wine exhibit up. So if you want to read more about the Norton grape, like Katharine's been drinking tonight, come hear about the importance of the Norton grape in the Virginia wine industry. We still have that exhibit, but we're doing some pretty major renovations to most of the rooms on the first floor. And we'll also, at the same time that we reopen with those renovations, have a new exhibit looking at the early years of the country, particularly after the Constitution, but specifically 1800, about 1825. So some new Republic controversies in their own right that we're going to examine in that new exhibit in the new space.
And Katharine, tell us about what's... Yes, 1812.
Travis,
Katharine...
but I'm going to rope him in for a pour over history about the War of 1812 coming up.
Looking forward to it.
And then Katharine, what's going on down in your neck of the woods?
Well, we're still open as much as we can with COVID precautions, but it is Black History Month right now, and we are celebrating in every way we can. We have several special tours going out, specifically focusing at the Randolph House site called Freedom's Paradox. We're also focusing all of our Facebook Live days. We have 3 days a week on Black History Month. Tuesdays is always Trades Tuesdays, so it floats around our trades department and our skills department. Wednesday is our education outreach, and then Thursday is my department. It's the character live feeds. Today was Gowan Pamphlet. They're always at 2:00 in the afternoons. And then of course next month starts Women's History Month, so we're going to be celebrating in that way. Also this weekend, I believe, again, really bad fake wife, we're celebrating President's Day weekend virtually. So not only will we have an audience with Washington, an audience with Jefferson, an audience with Madison, and an audience with Governor Henry. He always has to weasel his way into President's Weekend, but live, but we're also going to be doing our Evening with the Presidents, which is a big event that we do annually virtually. So if you go onto the CW Facebook page, you can find out more about that. But Black History Month now, Women's History Month in March, and then we'll hopefully get back up in April with even more programming as we're allowed to reopen.
Awesome. I think you can get there at cwf.org. Is that right?
Yep. colonialwilliamsburg.org. Mm-hmm. And we're on Facebook and Instagram and all those fun things too, because we're so socially hip.
So check out Colonial Williamsburg to find out all their upcoming programs. Check out loudonmuseum.org, PiedmontHeritage.org. I'm going to get my own website correct.
I was gonna say, did you forget our own organization?
I know, it's one of those days.
And past episodes of History on Tap on all of our YouTube pages, and of course, Historians on Tap on Facebook. We've all got membership programs as well, so certainly we would love to have you in the loop and have your support with our membership programs. And I think we're going to have another virtual History on Tap in March that we're working out, and then definitely getting back in person as soon as we can.
That's right. And a special shout out to all of you viewers. You are our real Valentines.
Oh.
I'll drink.
We love you guys. Thanks.
Cheers.
Everyone.